What happened?
I'm gonna give it like another 2 or 3 minutes. We can get started.
What am I watching here? Jorge, what are you doing?
Oh, sorry, I went outside.
You're giving us a show.
Sorry. I went outside.
You need to turn your... Somebody needs to turn his video off.
Yeah.
Turn it off?
That's all right. Well, we can leave. You guys are all
Yeah,
welcome to put your videos on in the for this first beginning part. It's kind of nice to see faces.
Humans.
Yeah, other people.
What are we up to now?
We're at 18.
Mm.
So there's a few scragglers out there. All right, I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Can you guys all see that?
I can.
Okay, great. The only thing I'm not sure about is if I can still admit people while I'm sharing. That's my fear. Well, it's 7:06, so we'll just go for it. All right, so hello, everybody. Welcome to this virtual program. I hope you guys are all doing well wherever you are and staying safe and healthy. And it is nice to see some faces. I'm sure we can all agree. So I'm Margaret Rohde. I'm the Conservation Manager for Wissahickon Trails. And since some of you might be new to us, I just want to take a minute to tell you a little bit more about who we are and what we do. So if my PowerPoint will advance. We're an environmental nonprofit organization. We're based in Ambler, Pennsylvania, in Montgomery County. We were founded in 1957, and we were founded with the goal to protect the health of the land and waterways within the Wissahickon watershed. So the watershed is all the area of land that water is flowing over, either overland or underground as groundwater, as it makes its way to the Wissahickon Creek. So the Wissahickon watershed is all of that land. And this is a map of the watershed on the right. So since 1957, we've successfully saved close to 1,300 acres of land from being developed within Montgomery County. And all of that land is extremely valuable for wildlife who, as we know, are experiencing a lot of issues with population loss. They are facing a lot of threats with continued development of natural lands and habitat loss and habitat fragmentation, and of course, climate change. So all of that land that we've protected is close to 1,300 acres is really important for them, for their populations. It's spread out across 12 nature preserves, which you can see in this map kind of hug the Wissahickon Creek. And all of them have trails. So we maintain and operate 24 miles of trails. And we manage all of our preserves to be as ecologically healthy as possible so that they can continue to support species of insects and birds and mammals and have all the resources that those species need to continue to survive so that they're here for future generations. And we maintain all of those 24 miles of trails because we know that they are our community's connection to nature, and we know that how important it is for people to have access to green spaces. And I think we're all really feeling that right now. So all of our preserves and trails are still open for you to get out of your house and explore. And we don't get any federal or state funding except for occasional grants. So we are only able to do the work that we do to protect the land and waterways of the Wissahickon because we have the support of a really amazing, diverse community who shares our values and similarly cares about nature conservation and protecting wildlife and habitat and keeping our waterways clean. So this is our third virtual program because we're trying to bring the Wissahickon watershed to your home and continue to educate our community about conservation and what you can do to create habitat in your own backyards. Our mission as an organization is to engage our community to protect and steward and enjoy the land and waterways of the Wissahickon alongside us. So education is a big part of what we do because you all have habitat that you can manage and create for wildlife, which is a big part of today's program. So here's a couple of our upcoming ones that I wanted to highlight. Next week, yeah, I don't know what time is anymore. That is next week. Thursday, May 14th, we have a learning birdsong workshop. This is really great for beginners. Our senior naturalist is going to lead that presentation. So if you want to start getting into birding or be a better birder, it's a really awesome program. She really knows her stuff. And then our presenter today, Cindy Nuss, is going to come back the following week on Wednesday, May 20th, to talk to you about choosing pollinator plants for your garden. So to register for those events and to find a few previously recorded programs that we've already done the past couple months, just visit our website, check it out. And before I hand it over to Cindy to start the program, I'm just going to go over some Zoom basics. So as people come in, their microphones are going to be muted, and I'm going to leave it that way just so that we can all be sure that we hear Cindy as she presents. You can leave your cameras on. If you turn them off, we found that it kind of gives you a better internet connection. So it's up to you if you want to leave them on or off. And as we go through, you can enter questions in a chat box, which is going to be on that bottom menu of your Zoom screen, and it just says chat. So if you click that, you can put all of your questions in there, and I'll kind of keep track of them and moderate. And if there's a point where I can jump in and ask Cindy a question, if I can like delicately interrupt, then I will. We'll try to get your questions answered that way. But if not, there's also going to be time at the end for Q&A. And this is all going to be recorded, so you'll be able to access it in probably just a couple days from now. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Cindy, our presenter. Cindy is an ecological landscape designer, coach, consultant, and educator for Nature's Way Designs. I'll figure out how to give you control. Make host, there we go. And Cindy has like a million certifications in horticulture and conservation design and permaculture. And she's done quite a lot for Upper Dublin Township in establishing their Birdtown program for Audubon, Pennsylvania. So for years, she's just been spreading knowledge and awareness around the importance of native plants to wildlife and insects. So it's really awesome to have her here. And how you doing, Cindy? You got it up?
I'm not sure how to get onto it. Share screen.
Yeah.
Ooh, I want that. Where is it?
I think the share screen button, it's like right in the middle of the menu on the bottom.
Yeah, I'm seeing all my other stuff, but not that. Wait a second. I'm just gonna.
Every Zoom meeting is an adventure.
Okay, can you see this? Oh, no. No.
Not yet.
Hang on. Okay, no, share screen. Here it is. Okay. You see it now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, welcome everybody. Today I'm going to talk about creating wildlife habitat for your own backyard or anywhere else you want to do it. It's as much about function. I want to teach you about how things function in the environment, as well as what to plant. So on from here. Okay, so you may be asking yourself, why should I care about creating a healthy wildlife habitat in my yard? Well, today I'm going to tell you about how you can benefit from using native plants to create healthy habitat, having insects around, and landscaping sustainably. So native plants provide ecosystem services critical for life. Margaret, can I shut this off? This box on the side is...
If you go to the top of the box, the participants window, there's like a
Yeah.
little menu at the top. If you click
Yeah.
the first one, it like minimizes it. There's like a small box and then a bigger one and then like a grid.
Oh, wait, that's not one. What am I saying? No. How about this one? Oh, there we go. Sorry. Okay. So, native plants provide ecosystem services critical for life. Now, this is any native plant, but trees are the biggest, so they provide the most. So I'm going to talk a little bit about trees, but it pertains to most any plant you want to use it for. So first off, they provide oxygen and water. They purify the air and the water. They prevent erosion. They sequester carbon from the atmosphere. They decrease energy usage. They regulate the climate. They provide shelter and building material. And last but not least, they provide food. Oh, wait. Oh, okay. So one thing we know is that water permeability is significantly improved by planting. Now, as you all probably know, you admit him?
Yeah.
I just did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So when water hits your roof, it just runs right off, right? But when water hits your yard, it pretty much does the same thing, because most yards are extremely compacted by the builders when they're building your house, especially if you have a basement, because they dig out the foundation and they throw all the soil on the outside. They scrape off all the topsoil, And then they build the foundation and they compact all the soil around the house so the water doesn't leak into the basement. Meanwhile, that compacts all the soil around the house and it makes it very impermeable to water. So what you need to do is plant. As you can see, that most of the water is absorbed by forests in our ecosystems here. Cropland is somewhat better, but mostly we want to have something reasonable with lots of trees and shrubs and plants. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about how water is captured. First, the water hits the tree. It either runs down the stem into the ground, then it runs down the root system through the pores that the roots make. It goes into the aquifer, but it penetrates through the rocks, which cleans up the water on the way, and also keeps the temperature more even with the ground, which is about 55 degrees. Some of the water is intercepted by the canopy, and that water evaporates, and that generally causes some cooling. And some of it goes into the leaf litter below, which is like a big sponge, and that absorbs it. And some of it, of course, goes through and hits the understory. So you can see the more layers you have, the more chance you have for it to slow down on its way down. Now, so what trees do then is they provide less runoff and they replenish the aquifer, and in the process, they purify the water. They provide less protection against erosion. The water runs off with less force because they're like a big umbrella and kind of slows it down. And then what it does is it makes it so that you have to water less because you have better retention in the soil. Okay, so everybody knows about, well, maybe not, but most people know about photosynthesis. And the process of photosynthesis, the leaves open up the stomata, which are like the pores, to absorb the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere while releasing both oxygen. But also in that process, air polluting gases are absorbed by the stomata, and that pulls them into the tree and sequesters them so that you're not breathing them. Also, water is pulled from the soil through the tree and into the leaves during photosynthesis, where it's released through the open stomata. You've heard of the drip line? Well, that's where the water comes from. The water's going down to the tips of the leaves and then dropping down to the ground. And it evaporates into the air or down to the ground. And this process is called evapotranspiration. And that's what's responsible for rain. So, you know, in the desert, there is no rain, but in the forest, there's a lot of rain. So the final outcome of this is that we get purified air and fresh water. Now, some of the fun facts about trees. A single tree can absorb 10 pounds of air pollutants a year and produce nearly 260 pounds of oxygen. And that's enough to support 2 people. So every time a tree's cut down, that's oxygen for 2 people. A single white oak tree can infiltrate about 5,200 gallons of water a year into the underground aquifers. As we lose more and more trees to development, this becomes much more of a problem and the water runs off instead of going down into the aquifers, plus we have flooding. 100 mature trees can intercept 100,000 gallons So that's a lot of water. And for every 5% of the tree cover you have added to a community, stormwater runoff is reduced by 2%. So if you're a stormwater management person, you would be most likely to be the one planting trees. Now, I know it's hard to see these names of plants, and you don't really need to see them. I'll tell you what they are. But as you can see on the far left, Kentucky bluegrass is what we normally plant as our lawn. And you can see that the roots are incredibly short. This is a foot right here. So these are about 3 inches deep. Now, if you compare that to some of the native plants like Indian grass, that goes down about 9 inches, the root system. And that's because our grasses are adapted to our environment, which has wetter winters and drier summers. So they need to have the deep root system to permeate the water into the soil and keep it there in the summer. Now, this is Indian grass. This is big blue stem and prairie dropseed here and switchgrass and little blue stem. Now you can see they all have huge root systems compared to lawn grass. So this is one of the other reasons why lawn is so useless as Kentucky bluegrass. The water just doesn't permeate into the soil. Okay, so you may have heard about carbon sequestration and greenhouse gases, but what it basically is the transformation of atmospheric carbon into a solid form. In other words, the trunk, the leaves, the roots, to tie up the carbon from the air, the carbon dioxide. Now, we breathe in and out carbon dioxide. We take up oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. Trees do the same thing at night and during the day, but during the day, they photosynthesize. So they actually reverse that process. They breathe, they take up the carbon dioxide and they put out the oxygen. So that's the only time we get oxygen put into the air. Now, the above ground carbon is basically the stems, the branches, and the foliage. But a lot of it is actually down below the ground in the root system. And the fallen leaves and branches add to that carbon in the soil. But really what's underneath the soil is a whole nother ecosystem based on microorganisms that they take up a lot of the carbon, and they share that with other trees. Now, I mean, they don't share it with the trees, but they give minerals back to the trees in the process. But when you disturb the soil starts to, the microorganisms in the soil, they start to grow, and that causes a lot of respiration, and that puts a lot of carbon dioxide out into the air. So that's one of the reasons why farming is detrimental, when they're constantly scraping the soil to plant the crops. Now, you can save a lot of energy by planting trees around your house if you do it in the correct manner. In the winter, our winds are primarily from the north, northeast, northwest, And if you plant evergreen trees on that side of your house, it will save you money from the wind blowing on your house in the wintertime. Now, in the summer, if you plant deciduous trees on the south and the west sides of your house, they'll provide you with shade. But in the winter, they lose their leaves, so the sun will come in from the south and the west and heat up your home in the winter. Now, if you plant trees around your air conditioner, that can save you money on your air conditioning system, because believe it or not, cooler air conditioners means they have to work less hard. Actually, Pico gives out money to, or actually gives out trees to people to shade the side of their house where it's the most sun, you know, there is the most sun, like the west or the south. Oh, crap. Sorry. Okay, so plants moderate temperature extremes. Is sidewalks and streets do nothing but absorb heat, and in the summertime it can make the temperature of the area a lot hotter. So shaded surfaces can be about 20 to 45 degrees cooler than the peak temperatures of the unshaded surfaces. Right now, we're trying to build an island garden in a parking lot in the Upper Dublin Township building, and we're trying to put in as many trees as we can to shade the parking lot, crazy as that sounds. But also, like I talked about before, the evapotranspiration from the photosynthesis, that alone can reduce the summer temperatures by 2 to 9 degrees, and that's on top of the shading. So they really do help in cooling the surface down, especially in the city. Now, plants also provide shelter. They, you know, of course you have the trees for the birds, but you know, you have it for all the animals, and then the leaf litter for the insects over the winter. They're also the primary source of food for all animals. Everything from the seeds and nuts and berries for the birds, plus the leaves, the actual leaves for the herbivores like the insects, especially the moths and the butterflies. Now, the insects provide services to the plants like pollination. They control the pests, like this little ambush bug. He'll just grab things out of the air, like mosquitoes, whatever comes by, he'll eat it. And then they also decay waste, like I'm going to show you in a minute. And they also are food for many, many animals, especially birds. So 97% of all insects are beneficial, and that's all insects, but more than 99% of native insects are beneficial. We have a lot of bad actors that come from other countries, like the spotted lanternfly. Now, 96% of all birds require live insects to feed their young, so we need to support them. And especially they like caterpillars because they're nice and squishy and easy to digest. Insects co-evolve with plants over millions of years. There's always been this battle. The insects eat the plants, and then the plants defend themselves by putting out high levels of toxin, or they also call in other insects to attack the insects that are eating them, like parasitic wasps and the like. So these insects have developed all of these interactions over the course of millions of years. Now, more than 90% of all the insect herbivores are specialists. That means they can only either eat one family of plants or one genera, or even maybe just one plant. So if that one plant disappears, so does that insect. Now, these are just some examples. The Baltimore checker spot needs plants in the, I think it's the laurel family, like white turtlehead, to survive. And they're really kind of rare because people just didn't really plant white turtlehead. Bowman's Hill has seen them because they planted them there and in mass. The spice bush swallowtail is will only eat spice bush and a few other plants, but you may see that one walking around in the parks. The decomposers play a role too, because they break down all of the wood and the leaves and detritus from other organisms. Like the bacteria and the fungi, they break down everything in the soil. And things like beetles will eat, they eat things. They actually lay their larvae in the wood, and the larvae eat the wood to make it porous. You probably see tunnels in there and how it's kind of eaten out. That's a lot to do with things like beetles. And they also detoxify the waste. The fungi actually can decontaminate areas of nasty chemicals. You can actually find, there's a really amazing book about this where you can look up what organism you want to put on, say, a farm field that has toxic chemicals that people used back in the old days to, kill pests, and you can clean it up with these fungi. You just put the spores on and some carbon, and they take it all up, and you can actually scrape them away and take them away and use them as take them to hazardous waste if you need to. But a lot of the chemicals, they just break down. But things like lead, stuff like that, they don't break down. It just stays in them. So you need to get rid of that. So what makes the best wildlife habitat? Well, this is how nature does it. If there's a disaster, let's say a flood or fire, any kind of disaster where everything's wiped out, what happens if no humans are involved is that it takes a couple years for plants to come back. And the first plants that come back are annual plants. And a lot of those annual plants that are native, we think of as weeds, but they're really not. They're just annual plants that come back with a ferocity when there's nothing there. But as time goes on and other things will come in, like the grasses and the perennials, and the annuals will all kind of be shaded out and go away. And then as time goes on further, you get the grasses, bigger grasses, shrubs, trees, and young oaks and hickories, that type of thing. And then eventually, if you do nothing for like hundreds of years, you'll have a climax forest or community where it's mostly just big trees with nothing growing underneath because it's so dark and shady. And in Pennsylvania, we generally don't have that because when the settlers came, they cut down all the trees, they farmed the whole state, and they cut the rest of the wood for making building materials for housing and boats and whatnot. And so most of Pennsylvania is only around from about the time of like around 1900, we started preserving the state of Pennsylvania, and then all the forests and the trees that we have, things we think of as big trees, most of them are only as like 120 years old. So actually even the deer were extirpated, which is the same thing as extinct, but not from the earth, but just from the state. There were no deer here. The Fish and Wildlife Service brought them back for hunters, but there were no deer because there was no food. So we as humans can do something about this. Now, there's a thing called community dynamics, where each kind of animal lives in a different biome or ecosystem. Now, some birds and animals live in the meadows that first start out in the first stage of succession. Some, like the high trees in the climax type forest, well, they never really get to the climax forest yet, but they get pretty tall. And then others like it somewhere in between. So you can see the grasshopper sparrows and the meadowlarks, which are critically endangered because we keep getting rid of their meadow ecosystem. They live in big meadows, like 50 to 100 acre meadows, whereas veeries will only live in a big tree. And there's a lot that live in between. So what we can do as humans is we can design our yards, or if we want to work in a park and do ecological restoration, we can add layers to our community by putting in different size plants, different shapes. This is just an example of a sunny, moist community. If you've ever been to Robbins Park, you'll see this kind of thing. You might have white oaks, red maples, white pines, serviceberries, red osier dogwood, silky dogwoods as the smaller trees, and then shrubs are the black chokeberry, winterberry. And these are all things that grow in sunny, moist conditions. And it goes all the way down to the, the perennial layer with the grasses and then, water. So you can see that you can design it to have different layers of the ecosystem present, which is what happens in nature when you let things go and you don't interfere.
Hey, Cindy.
Yeah?
Can I interrupt you with a question from the chat box?
Sure.
So someone is wondering, what can I plant to crowd out garlic mustard in shaded areas? My first thought was like wild ginger and asters would probably be good. And maybe
white wood asters, yeah.
Yeah.
And I have Virginia creeper. It crawls along the ground. I mean, this is what grows naturally in my wooded backyard. And also Pachyra aurea. It's the golden ragwort. That's pretty good at doing it. It may not flower as prolifically, but it is a real tight, close to the ground cover.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, there's a lot of grasses like Carex pennsylvanica.
Right.
That's a good one.
Sedges.
Yep, sedges. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I'm putting it in the chat box.
Okay. So before I was saying about the caterpillars, so if you want to support the most species of insects basically moths and butterflies, which are the basic food source for most birds and a lot of different animals like foxes, skunks, opossums, that like that. You should plant the ones that support the most insects. Remember before I said that herbivores are specific. Generally, they like specific families. Well, Doug Tallamy did a lot of research with his grad students, and they counted how many different species of butterflies and moths they found living on these plants. And they found that oak trees are the pinnacle. They have, that's Quercus, by the way, up here. You can see they support 557 species of caterpillars. So Doug Tallamy, who is a professor at University of Delaware, he's the one that wrote the pivotal book called Bringing Nature Home. He highly recommends planting an oak in your yard if possible, even if it's a smaller kind of oak, just because he calls that a keystone species. So it will support the most wildlife as far as insects and birds. Now, there's a lot of other things like oaks, well, birches, maples, dogwoods, willows, viburnum, hazelnuts, blueberries, serviceberries, bayberries, and pines. They all support a lot of insects. So any one of those would be a good choice. Viburnums are good if you don't have a lot of room and you just want a nice shrub. Same with bayberry. So native plants are also adapted better to drought, so you don't have to worry about watering so much. If you compare, say, buffalo grass, which we don't have here, but I'm just going to say that one, you can see that has roots that go down 8 inches. Oh no, 8 feet, sorry. And if you compare that with fescue, which is a turf grass, that only has roots that go down about 3 inches. If you compare, say, daylilies with black-eyed Susans, you can see the differences like between 2 feet and down to about 6 feet, the roots go down. And if you look at 9-barks, their roots go all the way down to 15 feet, whereas a spirea the roots only go down to about 3 feet. So whenever you can, replace the turf grass and plant native plants because they're more adapted to our environment. Now, I'm sure you've seen these arborvitae hedges and you know what happens to them, but I'm just going to say that if you limit your diversity when you plant, you're going to get infestations, and that's going to wipe everything out. And then you'll also get extinction of other insects and things that are dependent on those plants. So the best thing you can do is plant mixed borders with many different kinds of plants. Fruiting shrubs, fruiting trees, evergreens, all different sizes, textures. That's the best thing to do. Like down below here, you can see this is at Mount Cuba. They have a pine. Not really sure what that is, but you can see they're all different things, all different forms. And that way, if you have the pine bark beetle, you're not going to lose everything in your yard. Now, if you want to plant for pollinators, you need to plant in masses of 3 to 7, somewhere in that range, so that the pollinators will see this. If you've ever looked for butterflies, try laying down on a chaise lounge or something on your patio and look up at the sky, and you'll see the butterflies are flying pretty far up there. And they come down because they see a mass of flowers. They don't come down if there's like one here, one there. You need to have a mass so they can see that. And plus, if you're a bee, you don't want to be flying all over the place to get your energy. You're trying to feed your, offspring in the shortest amount of time with the least amount of energy expenditure as possible. So you want to have plants close together of the same type in mass. And of course, you got to give them some room. You don't want to pack them too tight. And you also want to stagger bloom times. You need food from spring until fall. A lot of people have plants and then they stop blooming, and then they have plants and then they stop blooming. You can't do that with bees because they need it all year round. Now, for butterflies, you need a lot of nectar sources. They like red, yellow, orange, pink, and purple flat-top flowers or short tubed flowers. They don't have a really long proboscis. And then they need the specific host plants for their larvae, like, for example, the milkweed for the butterfly, for the monarch. And then they need some kind of water. And the best thing to do is have like a little sort of mud puddle for them, because they don't have deep, they can't get into a deep water container, so like a saucer with a little bit of mud in it, because when they're sucking up nectar, they're not getting minerals, they're just getting sugar. So they need the minerals. So they'll go down into mud, and you see them a lot on the ground. That's what they're doing. They're trying to get minerals from the ground, from the soil. So you need some kind of little watering device. And then you plant your flowers in the sun. Their wings need to heat up for them to fly.
Cindy, so that's a
Yes.
good point for another question, which is, do you have any suggestions for native ground cover species with full sun preference?
Ground cover, full sun. Well, I like Phlox subulata.
Mm-hmm.
That's moss phlox. I like wine cups. It's Calaroe. Let's see. Let me think about that. I'll come back to that. I'm going to talk about this stuff at the end. So let's get to the end and then we'll revisit those questions. Okay. Did you have something else while we're here?
No, that was it.
Okay. Yeah. We're going to touch on some of this stuff at the end. Okay. So what you need to attract bees, you need the simple flowers, no double petal types. All the double petal types don't have any nectar and they don't have any pollen. They're completely sterile. So bees can't use them. Bees don't see color the way we do. They see it in a different wavelength. So they don't really see red, although they go to some red flowers. In general, they won't go to them because they don't see red. But there may be underlying colors that we don't see in some of these red flowers. So they see yellow, white, blue, and purple flowers. So those are good choices for them. They like rotting wood for them to take some cover, maybe nest in. And then they like consistent flowers from spring to fall. And open ground and flower stalks for nesting. The only bees that make hives besides the honeybee, which we're not talking about, are bumblebees, and they make their hives. Most bees make their hives in the ground. But the solitary bees make their nests. They call them cells. So they're like mason bees, and they make like, it's almost like a little cell, and then they cover it over with dirt or leaves or something in between. They lay their eggs in the flower stalks instead of in the ground. So you need to leave your flower stalks over the winter, and that's painful to do sometimes, but it does really add texture if you leave the whole flower stalk alone, leave the seeds on it and everything. You'll see that the native bees will live in those over the winter. And then water in a shallow container, sort of like the butterflies. And then what you need to attract birds is a consistent source of food, a safe place for them to nest, lots of shrub and tree cover, that's where they nest, a source of live insects like caterpillars to feed their young. Of course, hummingbirds don't eat caterpillars. They eat little things like fruit flies and mosquitoes because they're very tiny. But they need nectar instead of, berries and nuts. And then all birds need nesting materials like small grasses, twigs, spider webs, or even a birdhouse. A birdhouse is a big benefit to a bird. They don't have to find a hole in a tree, and they're safe. And then they also need some form of water. Now, I'm going to talk to you about how do you put this all together. Well, many people start out with plants in their yard, and as long as those plants aren't invasive, I tell them just keep adding. And if you find that you don't have room for the native plants you want to put in, then you can rip them out. But many people keep them both until they have the time or the inclination to take them out. One of the nice plants that I recommend to people is the white French tree. That's actually a pioneer tree. It's one of the first ones to pop up once there's a disaster, like in the stage of succession that I talked about. It has a beautiful fragrance and has plentiful flowers and the berries in the fall. The only thing is that it's dioecious, and that means you have to have a male and a female. If you want one of these trees and you want a male and a female, I recommend looking for one at the end of the month of May. That's when they're in bloom, and that's when you can tell. The males are much more floriferous than the females. And you may find berries on it from last year. I know we can't go shopping right now, but you can ask the nursery to look for you. Okay, so even rock gardens, if you've got a rocky ledge or something like that, you can plant little tiny plants in there. This is at the New York Botanical Garden. It's all native plants in there. I think there's pussy toes and bleeding hearts. This is sedum. So it gives you an idea, for an area. Maybe you're digging up a whole lot of rocks and you can just pile them all up and mix a little soil and gravel in there and make a nice little rock garden. So the best habitat is when you have mixed shrubs, perennials, and trees. So this gives you an idea. Here you have like dogwood. I think this is a witch hazel. Not sure what that is. Winterberry holly. And then you have your perennials down here, like the goldenrod, the phlox, and ferns. And this is Jacob's ladder. And even grasses. Grasses are butterfly host plants. So though they're not the most beautiful things. Sometimes they are functional. In mid-spring, you have all the nice ephemerals like the trilliums and the foam flower, well, the bluebells and, you know, things like that. This is wood phlox. This is on the edge of the woods. Not everybody has this situation, I realize, but it is a nice area to garden in nevertheless. And then later in the spring, early summer, you get things like the bottlebrush buckeye, which is this big tall thing here. And these flower heads are just about to bloom in this picture. The swallowtails just love them. And then you have the Itea or Virginia sweetspire. And in the fall, you'll get these alum root or Heuchera villosa. So you kind of mix it up so you have things blooming at different times, but you see all the layering here that's going on here. And then in summer, there's a whole host of plants you can plant. The phloxes, the echinacea, the coneflower, whatever, the rudbeckia, the red lobelia, that's a hummingbird plant, big time. The poppy mallow or hibiscus, that there's a native one. And even in the water, this is a pickerel weed. So there's a lot of choices. You just have to be creative about it. Now, if you have room for a meadow, which I don't know what your situation is, I'm trying to appeal to all situations. You could, you know, build a nice meadow and, you know, plant a lot of nice wildflowers. But I realize that most people don't have this much space. But even if you just make a big perennial garden, it's one step towards helping the pollinators. Now, this is something you can do in a small area. This woman had some things that were not native in there, but they were good pollinator plants. So we left them in there, but you can see one day I went back with a video camera and took a video of all the insects that came, and it was just amazing to see all the butterflies and bees. And this is really down to the really small level. This is a townhouse. So I had to take the picture in different directions so you could see it, because I couldn't get it. You wouldn't be able to see the plants all in one big shot. So you can see they have, this is obedient plant. This is little blue stem, some coreopsis, liatris, penstemon that blooms earlier. And they had the phlox subulata. This is full sun, phlox subulata. Coreopsis is a good ground cover. Somebody asked about that. And then this is the wine cups. And these are nodding onion, which is wild onion. Not the wild onion you dig up, but it's got bigger leaves than that. This is just a small form of eastern red cedar called gray owl. It's good for a small area. Normally it's a tree, but if you don't have room for a tree, you can try that. It has the berries that the birds just love, and they like to make a little house in there. Okay. Even in the city, it's amazing what people will do. This lady had, this is a, you can't really see it, but this is a crabapple tree, which is native. And this butterfly is doing its thing, getting the minerals on her porch. This is the patio that I took this picture from. So even in the smallest of areas, you can have these plants. This is fireworks goldenrod, echinacea. This is just planted here. We were working on it that day. And then this is a red bud, and she has the phlox in here. And then the tall garden phlox. This is the moss phlox. So you can fit quite a bit in a little tiny garden. I have to go back and take more pictures of it now that it's more filled in. Of course, I can't go anywhere right now, but so some of the native trees and shrubs that you can use in the fall. The asters are always a great choice. The New England asters are a hit with the butterflies. The coneflowers, the white ones are good. I know some people complain about cultivars, but this is at Mount Cuba and the butterflies were all over it. So were the bees. That's one of the cultivars that is a good plant. Then this is like our counterpart to burning bush. It's euonymus. Euonymus alata is burning bush. This is euonymus americana. It's called hearts of bursting. And look at that flower. I mean, the fruiting body. It's just so fascinating to see this. And it has green stems. In the winter, you see green stems, so it's kind of pretty. There's climbing monkshood, which is a vine. And then here's the white wood asters that Margaret was talking about as a ground cover in the woods. And then obedient plant. All kinds of bees come to that. And then Doug Talmy also says that goldenrod is another keystone species for the migrating butterflies in the fall. So this gives you an example of some of the nice goldenrods you can get. This is golden fireworks. This is the natural, oh, this is a good woodland plant, the wreath goldenrod. It grows in the woods naturally. I find it growing up in my yard and I just kind of move it all over the place because it just makes a really nice flowy kind of plant if you pack it in. It just will multiply in that spot. And then this is a cultivar. It's close to the ground one. It's not really usually that prostrate. It usually sticks up more. But they're really good for wildlife. I mean, they are one of the best bee plants you can plant. If you want early bloomers for the pollinators, I've seen bees going in these marybells, and the bloodroot is one of the first ones to come out, this one in the middle. That's out really early. That's probably the first one I see along with spring beauties, and that's probably the end of March. And then the shooting stars are out now. They're in the primrose family. You get the wild hyacinths, Dutchman's breeches. They're related to the bleeding hearts. And the red trilliums. These all grow, well, most of them except for the wild hyacinths grow on the edge of the woods. A little on the late side. Okay. Oh, I keep forgetting, sorry. Okay, so some more early plants. Right now we have these growing. The Jacob's ladder is a nice blue flowering plant, and it makes a really great ground cover in the woods. It loses the blue flowers after a while, but it's a nice texture. Also, this is the wild ginger that Margaret recommended. That has a nice texture too. It's more big leafed. And then this is this is creeping phlox. different kind of phlox. It likes part sun, so if you have some sun, you can use that as a ground cover in the woods. I have it in the woods. It's doing fine, but there is a break in the canopy. It's not total shade like the north side of a house. And then we have, of course, the columbines that the hummingbirds like. Okay, so this list was made by Dr. Dan Duran and his students when he was at Drexel. And they picked out plants that they liked based on their pollinators and their, you know, actually useful for their homes. So, you know, we have the butterfly weed, swamp milkweed. The smooth blue aster is one of my ultimate favorites. It's kind of tall. It's about 4 feet tall. It has these beautiful sky blue flowers. I think this might be a picture of it right here. And the bees and the butterflies are just all over it in the fall. The New England aster I showed you before. Joe Pye weed is definitely a butterfly plant. And mountain mint, this is mountain mint right here. That's a good one. And then I talked about the hibiscus. If you have a wet area, I have one growing in a bog, but you can grow it in just a moist area. I don't have it in like a swampy area. I have it at one garden and it's right next to the bird bath, so it gets a little more water, but it does fine. Virginia bluebells, they're one of the earlier ephemerals to come up and the foliage dies out, so you got to plant something around them. This is them here. The bees just love them because it's one of the first ones out for them. Violets, there's so many different kinds of violets. The common, you know, the common violet that you identify with the color violet, that grows everywhere in our area. Bird's foot violet usually grows in sandy areas. It does not grow well here. But there's a lot of violets out there. You can just walk around people's yards and see people who don't spray any chemicals. You can see all the different violets. May apples, they also go away. So you can't use them as a permanent ground cover. They're just a very temporary thing. And then for vines, coral honeysuckle, which the hummingbirds love, and it's the native host plant for the hummingbird moth, snowberry clearwing it's called. And Virginia creeper, that turns nice red in the fall. Buttonbush, this is a buttonbush. All the butterflies love that. And eastern red cedar, they all like, the birds like the berries and they like to nest in it. And of course we talked about the oaks, the red maples, and wild cherries and wild plums. Black cherries and pin cherries are pretty common. They pretty much just come up in everybody's yard because the birds eat the berries and just move them around. I've never really seen an American plum, but I have seen the Prunus maritima, and that grows really well in our area too. So any cherry is a good one. Okay, here's a smooth blue aster. So you can see it's just covered with flowers. You have to give it some room. This is a Savannah blazing star. It's a kind of liatris. It blooms after the kind of liatris everybody seems to have. It blooms about a month after that other one. and it stays till the fall, the fall season of butterflies are gone. Of course, we have the milkweed and Joe Pye weed, and I said the rose mallow already. Okay. So last but not least, we have the grasses. So some of the nicer grasses, there's little blue stem, there's the sedges. They're not really grass, but the sedge. This is tufted hairgrass. It's Dischampsia cespitosa. This is prairie dropseed. That's a very common one. It's, you can plant yards with a lot of this and it kind of looks like grass and it doesn't grow that high. You don't mow it. You can cut it if you want a little bit, but not a lot. And panic grass or panicum, that's everywhere. You can get it in different kinds of heights, but it's very prolific. You don't want to put it in a garden with a lot of other things. It's kind of nice to have like almost like a shrub kind of thing where it's on its own, because it is very fibrous rooted and it will outcompete a lot of the flowers. So my take-home message to you is add as many native plants as you can to your yard. Minimize the use of lawn. Plant mixed hedgerows of berry-producing trees and shrubs. Provide mixtures of native grasses and perennials with year-round blooms or seeds and berries. Avoid the use of pesticides and let nature take care of the pests by integrated pest management. Don't use weed killers because they kill the native plants needed for survival of wildlife, and they're also toxic to some animals. And strive for 60% canopy if you can, and 80% natives to support the birds and the insects. Now, I realize this is tall order for some people. If you live in a townhouse development or something like that, you might not be able to do canopy, but maybe there's some trees already there. And you have to be selective about the native plants because you don't want something that's real aggressive in a small garden. So that is it. Oh, I just want to tell you about this web page. You can go here and plug in your zip code and your email, and you can do a search and find out something that's good for you. Now, it has all kinds of filters, so you can look for shrubs, butterflies, anything you want. And this is the kind of thing it gives you, like the serviceberry. It says a small shrub tree that blooms and fruits early in the summer. And then it tells you what all kinds of birds it attracts. And so you have to, play with the filters, and it'll give you the best results and then the full results. And this is getting better and better over time. I recommend that to people. Okay, so we can open it up now to questions.
Awesome, that was great, Cindy. Thank you. We had one in the chat box about protecting things from deer. The perpetual question.
Well, here's the thing. Deer are like humans. And if they're not, there's three kinds of deer. There's the deer that you almost never see. There's the deer that are always in your yard, always, like during the day, during the night. And then there's the ones that you see at night only. I say that if they're in your yard all the time, there's not much you can do except for things that I'm not even going to mention. But if you just have them passing through. Like I find they walk down the side of my yard because it's easy. The thing to do is make it so that it's hard for them to walk through your yard. So of course a 7-foot fence would be great, but you can't do that all the time. So hunters always make this thing I call the bamboozle. It's like they take a bunch of pieces of stuff and they put it together so that the deer are forced to go a different way, okay? And that way they can make them go past their hunting stand, say.
Mm.
Deer can't see. Deer cannot see. They don't see well. Their visual perception is bad because their eyes are on the side of their head. So one of the things that people always recommend is putting fishing line between things because they can't see it, but they feel it and they don't like it. There's certain plants that they won't eat, like Eastern red cedar. Anything aromatic, they hate. So they don't eat mountain mint. They don't eat aromatic aster. They don't eat,
Do they eat bee balm?
not very often, no. And then new babies, they take tastes of things and they it's kind of like you and me. They eat things and they go, blah.
Mm.
Also, there's certain things that will make them sick and they'll taste it. I actually had them eat monkshood, it's a toxic thing. And I don't know how they ate it. They must have died or got really, really sick. But what I do is I surround the plants that I want to protect, like phlox. I'll put mountain mint around the phlox.
Mm.
And then they get in there and they don't want the smell, so they don't go after it. But they'll go down the edge of my yard and nibble on the trees on the one side. So, I had they like hydrangeas. So there's just some things they really love, like hostas and stuff like that, which are not native. But the best thing you can do is just keep changing it up and just ruin their pathway. Put stuff there. If there's something I want, like I have a native woodland garden and I have a lot of viburnums growing there. And they were there when I moved in and I let them grow. I just let them go. And the deer never came through that area. And then a tree fell down and then they found a way through. So then I started putting stuff in their way, like rhododendron, but I made a fence around it for a while. Then after a while they said, I don't like that anymore. So if you can get something if they're just decimating your yard, it's not, a lot of things aren't going to work. But
Yeah.
a lot of times they don't like woody because they don't have any teeth on the bottom, I believe it is, only on the top. So they just kind of tear everything off. So if it's woody, like some kind of shrub that's woody, it makes it really hard for them to eat.
Okay.
That's all I can say about that.
Yeah, that was good. All right, so we have another question. Any ideas for an area where a lot of invasive plants, vines, come through our fence from the property behind us?
Well, anything that's coming through into your yard, I would definitely cut it if it's on your side of the fence.
Yeah.
I would give it some space, things between the fence and your yard. So if you can give like 2-foot leeway so you can cut the vines as they come, you know, to the fence. But I had this situation in a client I'm working on now, and the people behind them had just a mess. So we were planting, well, that Asarum works good if it's shady. If it's, you know, because it's so dense, and Packer Aria, the golden ragwort, we were planting them. Mountain mint, that works good. They're all pretty aggressive plants, so they'll hold their own. But just putting something 2 feet out from the fence, at least. When I say 2 feet, I mean the tips of the leaves at the full width of the plant, 2 feet away, so that there's a space there that you can just go and hack. And then on the ground, you gotta plant the, you know, the really aggressive stuff, but the vines are still gonna come through. So you just have to keep hacking them.
Yeah. I will give it a second if anyone has any other questions. Cindy, do you want to try giving control back to me?
Sure. How do I do that?
So if you go up to the participants thing,
Okay.
and then there should be, next to Wissahickon Trails, there should be like an option that says more. And if you click it,
Make host.
yeah, there you go.
Oh, okay.
Nice, that worked. And then if you stop sharing your screen, I guess. Cool.
Hey.
Very nice. All right, well, if we don't have any more questions, then I guess we'll wrap up. So thank you all for coming virtually to our press. Oh, do we have one more question? No? Thank you. Yeah, thank you guys all for joining us. Check out our other virtual programs. I also wanted to say that we have a lot of resources on our website for native plants and stuff. So if you go to our wissahickontrails.org, under the top menu that says Take Action, there's a whole host of things about what you can do in your own yard, with some plant lists and other resources. And I also have some documents that have that idea of like different bloom times for stuff of what you want to plant, for trees and shrubs and pollinator plants. So I can just send out some PDF files to anyone interested, or just to the whole group. And we have one more question about what about weed control if leaving bare ground for bees? That's a good question. I mean, I would say pull them out by hand.
Well, yeah. You don't have to leave bare ground. You just have to, if you put the native plants there, just don't mulch. That's the key. Okay, because they need a soft area where they can get into. So if you have a nice loamy garden, let's say you use leaves or you know, ground up leaves, or just something soft, not wood chips, but soft, then they'll go through that. But to leave it completely bare is never gonna work. You just don't ever have bare ground in nature, really.
Yeah, that's true, I guess. Very cool. All right. Thank you, Cindy. That was really awesome.
You're welcome.
I appreciate your time. And yeah, maybe see you all soon sometime in a future program. So I hope Everyone stay safe and healthy and have a good rest of your night.
Yeah.
Thank you.